Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Callum, this is English Shooting, and let's get into the video. We've had news that firearms legislation here will be changing again, and this is all based on the Firearms Safety Consultation. We've covered this consultation previously and the invitation to answer a number of questions around 4 key points. The results are in, and the Home Office has given some inclination to where they're going to be heading and what areas of legislation they're going to be changing. For a quick refresher, the 4 main areas are high muzzle energy rifles, air weapons, miniature rifle ranges, and also ammunition. Before I get into how our legislation is going to change as a direct result of this consultation, I need to start off on quite a negative note, on something that I find absolutely, utterly disgusting. And it has nothing to do with the Home Office, nothing to do with NABUS, firearms licensing, or even the police in general, and absolutely everything to do with the pitiful response that this consultation had from the shooting community and shooting organisations. This was a really good opportunity for us to have our voices heard and to directly influence changes in legislation or even prevent any changes whatsoever. In total, there were 12,758 responses, with 2,905 of those from the shooting community and 320 of those coming from shooting organisations. There are around 500 to 600,000 licence holders here in the UK, and on estimate there is about 500,000 air gunners. That's over 1 million people that this consultation would directly affect, and with just over 3,000 responses from this community, we're talking about 0.3% of the community responding to it. This is absolutely pitiful, and we need to be very careful going forward that we don't ignore opportunities where we can directly and positively steer legislation in our favour. Giving more context of just how ridiculous a response this was from our shooting community, in the year ending March 2021, there were 2,590 offences with air guns. There is more people out there committing crime with air guns than are willing to respond to this consultation in our own community. We are quite literally letting the criminals dictate where our legislation is going to go rather than the law-abiding gun owners. Let's get into how things are going to potentially change. The first item on the agenda is high muzzle energy rifles. These were targeted under the Offensive Weapons Bill and luckily was able to be removed, avoiding a complete ban. They did say, however, that they would be reviewing it, and they used the Firearms Safety Consultation to do so. The main concern around HME rifles are the guns falling into the wrong people's hands, and whilst there is no data to suggest that criminals and terrorists are actively seeking out to get their hands on high muzzle energy rifles, the Home Office wants to look at mainly the security around these to mitigate any potential risk that is there. Now, all of the questions in this consultation were focused around the security levels and potential additional security provisions. The first and pretty much main question being whether people thought that level 3 security would be adequate in mitigating these risks, which the majority of people strongly agreed with. For those of you that don't know, level 3, whilst there is not a concrete recipe for exactly what it is, there are 3 key elements in the security guidance. The first is dispersing firearms, having separate cabinets around the house so that your collection and the amount of guns that you own are not all stored in one exact location. The second being additional target hardening of the storage cabinets with individual locks or maybe even additional locks, and also potentially moving everything into a gun room. The third is an intruder alarm to a specific British standard that is also centrally monitored. Just like with other aspects of firearms licensing, there can be a huge amount of disparity depending on where you live in the country, and it's elements like number 2 where we could see the biggest difference. There is quite a step between some different locks or additional locks on your safe to having a full-fledged gun room, and it does leave the door open for, say, more stringent police forces to go above and beyond and stipulate to HME owners that they must have full RFD or even Section 5 level armories. It's very clear to see that the Home Office deems HME rifles very differently to any other gun, and they want these increased security measures. And it's also little things like separate transportation. This may imply that you won't be able to transport a complete HME rifle. This wasn't something that was covered in the questions of this consultation, and very much feels like something that has been slipped in at the last minute. Whilst it is standard practice for the bolts to be stored separately, in terms of transporting them, it could be a major pain in the arse to HME rifle owners if they have to make 2 separate trips to the range because they're not allowed to transport them together. The next element of these responses is all surrounding air weapons. Now this is a big one for the shooting community in general, mainly because air guns, air rifles, air pistols are a grassroots entry into this sport. The majority of people that I talk to that now have firearm certificates, shotgun certificates, even people that have gone on to be RFD or Section 5 dealers, started with air guns. And the biggest threat to air guns within this consultation was removing the exemption that allowed 14 to 17-year-olds to be in possession of air weapons unsupervised whilst they were on private property. I am very pleased and incredibly surprised, even given that the majority of the respondents of this consultation were general members of the public, that removing this exemption was not a popular suggestion, and that the government will not be implementing this change. 14 to 17-year-olds will still be able to use air guns unsupervised. We haven't got off the hook completely though. There will still be some changes around air weapons in our legislation. Looking at the other questions asked, this first one isn't necessarily a bad thing as it is clarification. God knows we need more clarification within our firearms guidance and firearms law. It's asking for clarity around the offence of failing to take reasonable precautions. We talk about this all the time, more in the context of taking reasonable precautions when transporting firearms. Well, what are reasonable precautions? And when it comes to air weapons, air rifles, air pistols, there is no set requirement in how you are meant to store them and the security measures, and what one person may think is reasonable, another may not, and then you end up proving that in court. The last element around air weapons is working with the industry to improve safekeeping and also safe handling of these guns, to also supply locks with any new air weapons that are bought, and also to improve education to new owners. Just as a quick side note, I absolutely hate the term air weapon. I don't think it really has any context here. The majority of people that I know that own air rifles and air pistols shoot bits of paper and tin cans. A weapon is something that is intended to cause harm, and yes, whilst an air gun, an air rifle, an air pistol can be used to shoot legal quarry, it is not a weapon against people. That is not their intention. I despise the term, but it is littered throughout this consultation, and it is very hard to read anything from it without using it. What is going to change is that the government are going to clarify what reasonable precautions means when it comes to safe storage of air guns. We really don't know where that is going to go What the government may seem reasonable, we may completely disagree with. Is reasonable having a cabinet, having a safe? Is reasonable having an entire gun room for your air weapons? The other area to work with industry on safekeeping and safe handling is going to lead to gun locks being supplied with all new air weapons sold in stores. We might again have to be careful, because if they're talking about reasonable precautions and supplying these locks with every new air rifle, well, you can see where those two might meet. Miniature rifle ranges is something that we saw changing from a mile off, from the attacks it received in the Times to the numerous discussions within Parliament. For those of you that are unaware, Section 11(4) of the Firearms Act allows anybody that is not a prohibited person that is running a miniature rifle range to go out there and buy ammunition and a rifle up to .23 caliber without a certificate and without any checks. The real kicker is that there is no lawful definition of what a miniature rifle range is, meaning anybody with a back garden could declare themselves as running a miniature rifle range and could lawfully go into a gun shop and buy guns and ammunition without checks. Now, whether or not you believe that people should be able to buy guns with or without checks, within the UK we have quite a robust firearms licensing system, and it does in a way seem madness to have a very easy shortcut to all of that. What's the point in having a firearms licensing system where anybody with a patch of grass could go out and buy as many guns as they want without any checks? It's not surprising to see that the majority of people agreed, or strongly agreed, that somebody should have a firearm certificate to run a miniature rifle range. Regardless of the firearms themselves, if you are running a range, there needs to be some level of test, some bar that you need to meet to make sure that you are not going to be a danger to the public, that you are instructing people safely and you are operating that range correctly. Look at what happened with Full Metal Jacket. That could have brought the whole shooting community into disarray. If something tragic had happened there, those people were able to run that range to pretty much whatever standard they deem fit, and that standard really didn't seem very high. I think overall this is going to protect the shooting community and not necessarily be a burden on it. The second question is around limiting the miniature rifle range exemption to just .22 rimfire caliber. The majority of the people that responded were in favour of this, and again, being completely honest, the miniature rifle range exemption was always meant to cover .22 rimfire. Nobody is really that sure why it was ever written .23 caliber, including the likes of a 223. It was always meant to be .22 rimfire, and again, I don't think that this will have a huge effect on miniature rifle ranges. Every single one that I've been to only has .22 rimfire, so no real harm or no real big changes there. The third section though is where it really could have gone very, very wrong. In a lot of the pay and play miniature rifle ranges that we see up and down the country, like Double Deuce or even Phoenix, the most popular gun used there to introduce people to this sport is a semi-auto .22 rimfire rifle. This, again, like the 14 to 17-year-old exemption, could have potentially opened the floodgates if the public for once didn't have a little bit of common sense. When asked whether self-loading or semi-auto rifles should be excluded from the exemption, the majority of people strongly disagreed with this. The changes we're going to see around miniature rifle ranges and also the exemptions are limiting it to .22 rimfire. And the second change that we're going to see is the requirement for a firearm certificate in order to buy and possess the guns. The final area of this consultation and the last bit of legislation we are going to see changed is around ammunition. And I think this section contained the most dangerous question of the entire Consultation. To what extent do you consider that the possession of component parts of ammunition with intent to manufacture unauthorized quantities of complete rounds of ammunition should be made an offence? The majority of people either agreeing or strongly agreeing that this should be made an offence. The scariest word in all of that is intent. Intent is incredibly subjective, it's hard to prove, but it's also very hard to disprove and defend against. It is standard practice for home loaders to store significant quantities of component parts. That's why most people home load, is to either make sure they've got enough supply to see through shortages or to get bulk quantity discounts. Certainly at the moment, with primers getting so hard to get hold of and prices quadrupling pretty much overnight, it's no wonder that there are people out there sitting on tens, if not hundreds of thousands of component parts, when on their certificate they may only have a few thousand complete round limit. And whilst the Home Office says that the offence will be drafted in a balanced way to meet the clear concerns that it should not impact adversely on the legitimate home loading of ammunition, I am incredibly skeptical that it won't affect the legitimate users. Not forgetting that you are already required to produce a firearm or shotgun certificate when buying primers and powder. Really, how much more legislation do they need? It's all well and good saying that it's going to help stop crime, but they already have those tools available for two of the main component parts. Do they really need this third one at the risk of making law-abiding citizens potentially criminals overnight? Unfortunately, whilst this may be the most concerning aspect of the consultation, there isn't a lot more information out there yet. It's a case of we're going to have to wait and see exactly what the legislation is and how it is potentially going to affect law-abiding shooters in this country. As soon as more information and news comes out about the result of the Firearms Safety Consultation, I'll be sure to do a video and update you on this channel. I really hope that you've found this video useful and helpful in understanding what's going on. If you have, please give it a big thumbs up. And if you're enjoying this kind of content, please also make sure you're subscribed for any future videos. If you have any questions at all, please use the comment section below and I'll do my best to answer them. And of course, as always, guys, thank you for watching and I hope to see you soon.